we have to think of Palestine, its land and its people, and the law applicable in this case. The land, luckily for Palestine, during the British mandate and before that the Ottomans and the United Nations, we have complete record of ownership of the land in Palestine. I have, and in Palestine Land Society, 500,000 records of individual names and where they own. So we have no problem with that. The people, will talk about that in a minute. But the law, we have, a regime of international law which is ready for application, starting with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the covenants against racism and so on, and also self-determination and 181 and 194 and so on. But let's talk about the people, because the land is sitting there. We know who owns it. We know they are refugees, but we know who owns it. And the law is there. Now let us talk about the people. If we talk about the people, my figures here about 2008, but it applies. You will find inside Palestine today, the blue column is the Jews, but the top tranche is 300,000 of foreign workers. The bottom one, below that, is 1 million Russians, and the rest are Ashkenazis and Mizrahi, okay? With them, at that time, the Palestinians are about 4.5 million. Now they are more than that. But you see the black dots on the red. These are refugees of those. So more than half of them are refugees. But out of now today, Palestinians are 13 million, and half of them are outside Palestine. Look at the column on the right, outside Palestine. The absolute majority of them are refugees. Now, okay, so let us look at Palestine today. I'm talking about Palestine, which is called Israel. And let us examine who lives in the land of those refugees today. We know who lives there. We know where they came from, and we analyze that in detail. I'll show you a result of that. Palestine, during the mandate, has been divided administratively into 1,100 towns and villages. Each one of them has a town or village or more, and it has an area belonging to that village. So we call this village land. Village land is different from the village itself, the village land like that. So we examined how many people living there from the Israel Statistics Bureau, and we found that all the green areas have today no Jews or Jews less than 5,000. Almost 472 villages have practically no Jews, or absolutely zero Jews, or Jews less than 5,000 in each of them. And the documentation is available for someone there. So then the next step will be to see where is the land of the Jews. It is the same like I showed you earlier. That's the land they owned during the British Mandate. And they lived mostly on that land with a little spillover. We'll explain that. Here, for example, we have the cities. The cities are, especially the coastal cities, are mixed population. So the brown area indicate the land of the cities. Cities have a different treatment. But then, where are the Jews occupying the land of Palestinians with a large majority? They occupy the Palestinian land with a large majority, over 30,000, in the dotted areas. You see the dotted here, few of them in the south and the north. Only in that area. The Jews today are majority over the absent Palestinians. Now, next step will be to see in terms of size, proportional size, where do the Jews live? You can see easily where do they live. In Tel Aviv area, and in Jerusalem to the east, and in Haifa. The three dots at the bottom, big ones I told you about earlier, they are Asdod and Al-Majd al-Asqalan and Beersheba. But most of the Jews live in Tel Aviv area, of course absorbing Jaffa, and about a dozen villages there, and same in Jerusalem West and in Haifa. Now, we can then say to Palestinians, you can return. the red dots are Palestinian villages, they can return. They will all go to the green area where there is nobody there or very few people who are there. There is no obstruction to the Palestinian refugees returning in the structure of today. I'm talking here about villages, rural villages. I'm excluding, of course, cities, which have a different kind of treatment. We'll come to that in a minute. So actually, this is not a new invention. It's probably obscured from literature, deliberately or otherwise, by the Israelis. This map, this table, is done by Israel 2020. A big plan started in 1995 saying what Israel would look like in 2020. It's an Israeli document which shows that 88% of the land in Israel today is controlled by the army and the kibbutz but the population centers here are less than 8% in 2020, and they are 5% in 1994. Spaces and centers. And the military, of course, occupies all that. So here we have what you all know, but you are afraid to say. Israel is a military base, basically, with people in it. It's a huge military base. It's the largest military base from Paris to Peking. That's a fact. Now, we then should say, let us look again at Palestinian villages, and we see that these are Palestinian villages depopulated. The green section of the village are people who found refuge in Gaza, and the brown section of the circle are people who found refuge in West Bank and Jordan. So we can send them back to their villages. They don't need ships or airplanes. They can actually walk. It's within bus ride. We can repeat the same experiment for Galilee. And here there are already in the purple dots, there are Palestinians already there. And if we bring the refugees back, they will add only a small thing. Half the population in Galilee is Palestinian anyway, and those who come from Syria and Lebanon will hardly add to the whole picture. Now, this is the nice part, but the difficult part in the center, as I said before, around Tel Aviv and so on. What shall we do with that? Well, we can think. For example, we can create cantons. So we create canton Tel Aviv. I have added here in blue the settlement blocks of Jews today in Tel Aviv area. Now, I added also black areas. You can see them black, not here, shown here as being brown. I added this to connect the cantons. This canton actually contains a very large number, almost 3/4 of the Jews in Palestine, in Israel. And the rest of the areas, as I explained before, the dotted one are Jews living in Palestinian land, but the situation is much simpler. One thing I should add very quickly, that if you actually impose on that, the built-up area today, the built-up area, the expansion, urban expansion today, it does not cover more than these areas. We have another example for a camp in Gaza, Nusayrat camp. Here is the camp, and here are the villages where they come from, and we can lead them to go home. Okay, but they will go home to a deserted place, demolished houses. So we have to think of how we can rebuild these houses. The staging of the return is very straightforward. For example, out of 4.6 million, when the refugees from Gaza return, the number of refugees dropped to half. And then from Jordan, they dropped by 1 million. So actually, it can be done in about 4, 5, 6 stages in about 6 years. Now, we will bring them back to a deserted place. We have to see how we can house them in their location. This is Tantura, with the massacre of Tantura. We actually digitized the aerial photographs. We created a complete map of the village, and with names of houses and so on. This took 5 years at least, but now we have 10,000 files on all the villages. We know what they are like. We know the people there. We know who owned them. We know which refugee camp they live in. We know the road from the refugee camp to this. But then we did something else. We have to see what is the situation today in that village, in Tantura. Yes, 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 coming close. So this is the location. Now we need to build that, rebuild the destroyed. So we made a plan with Palestinian universities that the graduating class of architecture, each one should select a village and had to give a graduation project of reconstructing his village. And this is one example of the winning design in London last year. The one student designed Tantura again. We have a jury for this, and the jury distinguished architects from Germany, England, and Ireland, and Arab countries. And this year, we have 8 universities participating, not only in Palestine, but also in Jordan too, and the American University of Beirut. And next year, year 3, the competition will be among all universities in the world who would like to do that. Now, let us consider the facts. These are all facts, of course, but let us consider the facts about Israelis first. Fact number 1, Israel occupied all of Palestine by military force. And there is no legal justification whatsoever. And there are no borders. And there is a pile of UN resolutions against that, number 1. Fact 2, Israel enjoys unlimited support of the United Nations and the variable support of some Western countries. Fact 3, Israel is an important weapons and cyber products exporter. Economically, it's very robust. Half of the Israeli companies are listed in the New York Stock Exchange. The bond between Israeli economy and the European countries and the United States largely reflects the Jewish power in these countries. So no doubt about that. But actually, according to an extensive study which I mentioned earlier called Israel 2020, there will not be in Israel, there should not be in Israel, they say, Israeli study says, in Israel more than 8 million people, million Jews anywhere. Why? Because there are many reasons listed in 3 big volumes on that, because they wanted them to be in Europe and America, better for Israel. So they don't plan that. There is also a constant flow of Jews leaving Israel. As you know, 750,000 are said to be living abroad. We hear about 70,000 people applying for their German citizenship. But are they abandoning ship? No, I don't think they are abandoning ship. But that means the status quo is not stable. Now, let us look at the facts about Palestinians. I'll finish. They were 1.5 million in 1948. Now they are 13 million. In year 2030, Palestinians will be 18 million. Half of them on Palestine soil, and the other half are on the borders within 100 miles of the border of Palestine. They have no tanks, I'm sure. They have no airplanes. And in Palestine, they are either second-class citizens. We have discussed that. But many Arab regimes today abandon them. Of course, good old friend Trump and cohorts entered the scene as a bull in a china shop, and they destroyed international law. It doesn't look very pretty. But, here is the but. They have been in constant state of struggle for 100 years since the infamous Balfour Declaration. And they stood their ground for 6 major wars and hundreds of air, sea, and land Israeli attacks, mostly in refugee camps, if you notice all of them on that. They foiled 50 or 60 Western and Israeli so-called peace plans since 1949. All these plans are aimed to do one thing: let us resettle the Palestinians anywhere in the world except in their countries. But They have 170 UN members on their side, and the growing number of young people in the West actually on their side. And the third generation of refugees know where they come from. And now they are camping on the armistice line, watching their land this Friday and every Friday until as much as possible. So Ben-Gurion is wrong when he said the young will forget. They did not. But in the last 100 years, I want to remind you, more of you as scholars, I would like anyone to challenge me on this point. Not one oppressive regime survived in the last 100 years. Nazism, fascism, formal communism, European colonialism in all Asia, in all Africa, institutionalized discrimination, apartheid, all gone, except in Israel. And there are no moral or legal or geographic or demographic or economic or logistic reason why Palestinians cannot return. But the Israel racist and apartheid policy, and it must be abolished. And this is the job of every person in the world who have good conscience. Let us abolish that.